Well, we'll pretend like it's even straight up. And we'll call this meeting to order. Are you gonna? Oh, I take it. Oh, okay. You've got a name. I'm gonna attend, okay. I would entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
A second.
You have to make them. No, the chair, yeah, I didn't, but.
All right, I'll make.
Madam Chair, I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding, but if nobody's made the motion, I'll make it. If somebody did make it, I'll second.
I think the meeting's gonna go this way. Okay, the agenda is approved. Then I don't see any public participation, so I'm gonna skip over that. Old business. Nate, are you ready to? Do this in a little bit? No. I skip right over that too. I told you that. The meeting's gonna go. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Hal?
Madam Chair, I reviewed the minutes and I move to approve them.
I'll second.
Thank you. The minutes are approved. Now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the committee members, I'd like to focus your attention on page 4 of the packet, which is an action memo for the ED project. Since the board's decision in February of 2023 to pause the prior version of the ED renovation project, the only specific direction administration has been provided was to advance the new iteration of that project to the 65% design phase and to continue to pursue project funding through outside partnerships. If you look at the action memo, I've got some backup information and historical documentation surrounding the current state of funding, the project estimate, and also the project timeline. The bottom line is we're at a point within the project, we should be arriving at 35% design complete within a matter of a week or two now. The city has started preparations to be able to solicit for the construction manager at risk construction contract. And we're at a point where we require additional direction from the board in order to continue to pursue the project on the timeline without having any types of delays. So as you can see, I've got some options here. What I'm hoping to get is direction from the board so that we can solicit for the construction and management at risk contract. Jean is also here today and can help answer any questions about that process. But to give a real quick background on that, both the board and the assembly, because this is an alternative procurement method that otherwise is not captured within the city charter. Both the board and the assembly approved use of this alternative procurement method for the prior iterations of this project. I don't believe additional approval is required for us to continue to use that same procurement method for this project. But because of where we are on the design and we've not been given the direction from the board to advance beyond design at all, I believe we do need some additional direction to move forward with the project. So I'm happy to answer any questions. There are some options in the packet and some suggested motions. I think one question I have is I'm not sure whether we need full board approval to start the solicitation process. I know we would need full board approval before we would award a construction contract because we still need information about cost, for example, and the proposals that we would be getting. But I'm hopeful for today that we may be able to at least agree that we can allow the city to move forward with the solicitation component of construction management at risk contract. And I would be happy to answer any questions and
Madam Chair, I've got a number of questions, so I'm just gonna. When I add up. The money that you're looking for. I mean, you only have 4 million.
about 3.5. Yes, sir.
Well, what are we talking about, the bond fund?
Yes.
So that's a loan.
Oh, I see what you're, but in terms of money that's set aside in for this purpose, that's,
Yeah, but then you got the 4 million from your Congress.
yes.
And and the others alone, I mean, 3.5 million.
Oh, yes.
alone. Call it whatever you want, bond, whatever. So then so when I add these up, I get 11.5.
That's correct.
So I figure that you've padded yourself for a 10% or so, cost overrun, is that what it? Contingency.
Not necessarily, so when this cost estimate of $10.545 million was created. Contingency was factored into that, however, keep in mind that was based on very preliminary design information, not even 35%.
Well, a couple of years ago.
Exactly, so potentially, there's always a chance that the cost could come in higher than what we estimated. Based on the information we had at the time the estimate was provided. That's not necessarily the reason or the only reason why we've asked for the $4 million from the federal government, the $2 million from the General Commission, and are hoping that there may still be a $2 million opportunity with the state.
Okay, well, I guess my concern is you've got 3.5 million as a loan. You've got 4 million in the Congress, so that's 7.5. The other 4 million, you're waiting for an approval from somebody. Now, if the Congress cut down your request from 15 to 4, how about these other Denali Commission and so on? Are they going to cut? Maybe they'll cut them. And then you're not going to have 11.5.
Sure.
You might not have 10.5. You might not have 9.5. So my question is, what's plan B if this money doesn't come?
I think part of that comes down to the discussion here. In the absence of being able to secure additional funding, if we were to move forward with the project, that funding would likely come from our fund balance. And that's where we are. The other item I'd like to bring up to the group is we have identified several options to seek additional funding from outside partnerships. We applied for the Denali Commission last year at $2 million. Our grant application was received well, but we were told by the Denali Commission that they didn't think that project was as shovel ready as they would have liked. We think we've got a better application this year, and our project, we'll be able to get to construction in a quicker timeline than we would have at the time we made that request last year. But it's an unknown. We don't know what projects we might also be competing against. So I don't want to give any false hope or promises to our ability to secure that additional funding, other than we're setting ourselves up in the best possible way that we can to have a competitive application.
But if plan B is these funds don't come through, and plan B means we take more money out of the bank, doesn't sound good at this point. I mean, are any of these funds going to be committed before we have them?
No. I think this is always a dilemma when we're working to secure funding from outside sources. One rule of thumb I've heard as it relates to let's call it grant funding or anything like that, is you shouldn't be pursuing a grant unless you're planning on doing whatever that activity is anyways. And so I'm not suggesting that with no funding support, the board should approve moving forward with this project, but what is that line? Is it the 4 million? Is it an additional 2 million beyond that? But the reason I'm asking for consideration for a decision today is because we are otherwise ready to move forward to solicit for a construction partner, construction contractor for this work. If we delay soliciting for that contract, it is a day-for-day delay on when we can otherwise execute this project. So we could wait for additional answers from these possible funding partners and make a decision at that time, but it will also impact the timeline for the project.
Well, in stopping the train, I mean, you know. I don't have the background that all of you have. I mean, I just got here. So I have to ask a few questions. The other thing is the certificate of need. We're not gonna know about that till June. So what's your thoughts on that? I mean, what's the state saying about certificate of need? They can be pretty tough on it.
Through the chair. So we are in somewhat regular communications with the state regarding the certificate of need. We had submitted our certificate of need application the last time we were going to be doing this project and had already made it through some of the required activities that come with that. The public hearing, for example, all of the place. Through our conversations with the state after we put a pause on that certificate of need and have since resubmitted a revised application. We're not going to have to go back through that portion of the process again. But as you can see, the state does give themselves an amount of time to process that. I don't have any specific reason to think that they have a certificate of need, but if they did, yes, that would prevent us from being able to, for example, award the construction contract.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question? Sorry to interrupt. Maybe if we discuss the timeframe of the solicitation and how it kind of coordinates with those other ones, and maybe address some questions.
And Jean put a great calendar together. Jean, I don't have it in front of me, but Jean has laid out all of the milestones from a timeline perspective that would come with the solicitation process for that contract, when negotiations would take place, when approval might need to happen. And from my recollection, those things would not happen until after we were aware of the certificate of need date. But
And some big things, right?
and some programs, that's right. We anticipate, for example, probably in the late July, early August timeframe, hearing back from Denali Mission on $2 million. That's the timeline we heard last year. The state is a less clear process to me. We go through the CAPSIS. Any of those types of requests that go through the state use a state program. And I would anticipate though that would fall with the normal budget cycle for the state is when those things would be considered. So probably summertime frame as well. Jean, do you want to share some major milestones for the CMAR?
Yeah, yes, please. So the CMAR solicitation process is two-phase. We first do a request for qualifications and then rank a short list from those, and then with the shortlisted firms proceed with requests for proposals projects. And the purposes of that is the response to the cost proposals is a lot more involved, and so we want to make sure that we're asking for those responses from qualified contractors. So that stretches out the selection process. So if we advertise start next week, we would not be ready to award the CMAR contract until June 20th. which falls after the date, the statutory amount of time that the state has to do the certificate of need. We were a little bit gun shy about not all the funding being in place since the project was canceled once. But consulting our Architects Alaska, they felt if we had about 75% of the funding in place, that it would be prudent to go ahead and advertise for the CMAR, which we do now with that 4 million amount of funds from the federal government. So, you know, factoring in all our required advertising dates, that puts us on track. And once the certificate of need is received, that releases the spending cap that's required by the state. So I would like to point out too that the financial commitment with the CMAR initially is for pre-construction services, and the benefit is to bring this method is to bring the contractor on board early in design to get their input where they're acting more like a consultant. So, and those services are significantly less than the total construction contract. And we would not be committing to the construction amount until we were closer to 95% complete in design. So I recognize the concern that not all the funding is in place, and that's a concern of mine as well. But that's just to give you a frame of, you know, if push came to shove, we didn't get the other grants that the hospital is applying for, there is another avenue where it is easy to disengage with the contractor before those larger, you know, the 6.5 million estimated construction cost is incorporated into their contract. Any questions?
Well, I still have a couple questions.
Go ahead.
When this construction goes on, and the emergency room, right now we all know that we're losing money. So if you start reconstructing at the emergency room, that's going to cause some real problems with bringing patients through. That may decrease the amount of revenue they get through the emergency. Is this a good time to be increasing the amount of revenue to get through the emergency room? Right. Constructing a new emergency room? I mean, is this a good time?
Through the chair. So one thing that's not 100% finalized, this doesn't answer your question directly, but I think it provides some context, is the sequencing of construction activities here. What's captured in this project is both an addition to the existing emergency room. It'll expand the emergency department by about 1,200 square feet, and a renovation of the existing footprint. The concept would be if we could construct that addition first and move some functionality into the addition and use that as swing space, it could help limit, not completely eliminate, but limit the amount of interruption in services that we could. Obviously, we're going to have to keep the emergency department running during this whole time. We can't stop providing emergency services. So there will be disruption. Trying to do that at a time when we can, maybe it's a lower census time of year, lower census season would be ideal, but we are not far enough along to fully be able to present to the board what that sequencing looks like, but that would be a major factor. So I hope that gives kind of some context that we've thought about ways that we can ensure that we're not necessarily eliminating.
Well, we might be decreasing. I mean, because of all the construction, we might be decreasing our ability to bring people. People might not want to come.
You would like to speak to that?
Sure, thank you, through the chair. So when we kind of talked about this as a group and what it looked like within the dynamics of the emergency department, we have plans in place that could help offset that. The good and bad thing about our emergency department is people are gonna come regardless, so there's not like another service they can go to provide that care. So if we would lose revenue, it would be like the urgent care type folks who don't wanna wait, but we do have a plan in place, for example, to have a mid-level, maybe do a fast track during that time. To see people, get the treatment started in the triage room, maybe if they're able to sit outside in the lobby. So we're talking about all of those things to be able to not decrease capacity. The only thing that would change that or would impact probably length of stay, I would say, is if this construction project hit during the cruise season months. That would be a huge disaster actually to do that. But I think again, if we can time this right and it goes through in our plans to do a fast track and offset. Because in some of the plans, we'll have to move the nurses station potentially to 2 patient rooms so they can remodel the nurses station. And then what we do is take, use triage as a fast track of the mid-level to be able to see patients through there that maybe just need an x-ray or a quick blood draw and have them sitting there. And then the people who actually need beds would be in the beds, and they call that like a vertical ER, basically where people can sit in chairs. So we have a plan in place to try to move forward with that as well.
Through the chair,
Yes.
I would just like to add that this very reason is the primary reason that we have considered using the CMAR process, because we can bring the contractor on board to help plan out all this phasing, and they can bring their trade knowledge of construction sequencing and intertwine that with the medical operations and figure out how to best minimize the impact to the operations of the emergency department. So that's one advantage of bringing them on early versus having the architects design it to 95% and putting it out for bid. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more. Maybe this is for Joe. When we borrow this $3.5 million, how does that impact the?
It's already borrowed.
It's already borrowed.
It's in part of the.
So we're already paying it back. And what does that cost you?
But I feel with the interest.
So it's already borrowed.
It's already borrowed. That's part of the revenue bond they did.
Other questions?
Madam Chair.
Hal?
Yes, so I don't want to just stop discussion about this, but we've heard a lot of discussion over many, many months about why we need to move forward with the emergency room changes. There's some deficiencies there that are affecting safety and so on and so forth. So I think that at this time, it's certainly prudent for us to move forward. We're not locking ourselves into spending all this money, but we're at a point where we need to make progress. So I'm going to look at the suggested motion here, and I move that the planning committee approve the project plan as presented, and I direct the administration to continue with existing outside funding efforts and to work with CBGA engineering to commence the request for proposal process for the selection of a construction management at risk contractor.
Are you going to second? Thank you. The motion passes. I just want to say the longer we know, we've gone over these, not to diminish your questions, you need to have your questions answered. But we've gone over the deficiencies in the emergency department in detail over the number of months that we've been talking about it, and the longer we push it out, the more expensive the project is going to be. So at this point, I'm glad that this motion is approved, knowing that we have an out in the contracting process, but knowing that we're not stalling again and facing project increases. So thank you, Hal. And
I'd like to respond to that.
Sure.
But I have no problem with what needs to be done. In fact, you've gone over a little bit of it. It's gonna be something within it. It's important. But what I'm concerned about is in our present financial situation. You know, that we end up holding the bag. And then we have to take money out of it, you know, the cookie jar that, we end up paying for it, and then we're in a bit of a mess. That's my plan B, my.
I understand that, and it will be, if that comes to pass, it will be up to us to prioritize what's left of the pie. So, but we as a board so far are recommending that we move forward and take that risk because it's important to the long-term health of the hospital and the community, so. I mean, the entry to our hospital is the emergency department for many people, or most, I would say most of the folks that show up. So if we have a subpar emergency departments, we're at risk of long-term sustainability.
I understand that, and I don't oppose the project at all. It's very good and I think that bring it today, but I was just concerned about
The funding.
and that we don't end up holding the bag and in the end, it's plan B.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I'd just also say, I think between CBJ Engineering with Gene and myself, of course, we're gonna be providing updates, whether it's through the committee or through the board as we hit milestones, as we get more information on the project. So I really appreciate your questions. I think they're important questions to be asked. We should have answers to those questions. I'm glad we have some additional direction, but we'll bring these decisions back to the board as appropriate.
Any more questions or comments on this? Jean, you want us to go over the project updates?
Sure. Let's see, so for the Aurora Behavioral Health Facility, we recently approved the final change order and final pay application to Dawson. So we are closing that project out. It's officially in the warranty phase. So that will continue for a year. So there's still some issues that we're working out, but so far Dawson has been pretty responsive in addressing warranty items. And we are proceeding with the lead operations and maintenance process. It's a new process for achieving LEED certification that focuses on the building performance, energy and utility usage. So it's kind of exciting to be trying this out on this project. The CT scanner MRI project is entering into closeout. We're about to close that out. The underground fuel replacement project is getting underway again. They were on pause until spring. I think they've already started digging up the lines for the new piping to the fuel tank, and that should be wrapping up in a week or so, I'm told. We already talked about the ED addition renovation and we're nearing 35% complete for the ground floor asbestos abatement project that impacts mainly the materials management on the ground floor as well as some other spaces. We should have a 35% cost estimate on that shortly. We've advertised for consultant services to do a life safety assessment of Wildflower Court. We already know that their fire alarm panel is at the end of its life cycle, and it's difficult to get parts for it because they don't make that panel anymore. But we'll also have the consultant look at all the other life safety systems in the building. And they were charged with coming up with recommendations with cost estimates so that you all can then decide which projects to proceed with and when. And then we're wrapping some work up on the surge protection that is going to look at arc flash coordination and updating circuit breaker timings for the facility. And that should be the last phase of that. I think that's about it. Yeah. Any questions?
Questions for Jean? Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
New business. H.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the other committee members, as the chair and I were preparing for this meeting, we thought that it was a good time to discuss our plans for future construction activities, both as it relates to the FY25 budget process, but then also for as some of you may recall, if you just looked at Jean's project updates, there were two projects. One, the asbestos abatement project, and two, the surge protection project that over the last year or so, we had decided to not necessarily commit to. We wanted to go get some more information, flesh out what those cost estimates were going to look like for construction, so that we could make informed decisions about how we were making use of our deferred maintenance funding. One side effect of that is that we've got additional leftover monies in prior year deferred maintenance accounts that we can use potentially towards those projects or other deferred maintenance types projects. So as Joe was preparing the FY25 budget, he came to me and said, hey, I know we typically put $3 million toward deferred maintenance on an annual basis. That's a good amount of money for us to make sure that we're putting back into the physical plant. But because we have about $5 million in deferred maintenance from prior accounts, can we essentially skip a year and focus our attention on expending those funds that we got set aside? So just as a general heads up to the committee and to the board, that's the plan as it relates to the FY25 budget. It doesn't mean that we're not reinvesting in the physical plant, but it means that we don't want to necessarily find ourselves in a situation where we have $9 or $10 million unexpended that we had set aside. It's a good time for us to catch up, I guess is what I'd say. I also just wanted to let the planning committee know, and I can make this available for the next meeting. But you know, our facilities department has a running tally of what I'll call backlogged deferred maintenance projects that we're working on. These projects that show up as a design initiative are not coming out of thin air. I think we can do a better job as an administration of making sure that the board understands how those projects are prioritized, for example, what's the next project in the queue, and that's something that we're actively working. But we do have several $1 million of projects that, if given an infinite amount of time and money, we would want to pursue. And we prioritize those projects. We discuss them internally. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for us to incorporate discussion and direction from the planning committee as a part of that process moving forward. So that's kind of deferred maintenance. The other thing is over the past couple of years, we've spent a lot of time, we've had big projects, we've had a lot of construction activity. We've had the Aurora Behavioral Health Center, we've had a number of capital acquisitions that we've either acquired or have pursued and decided not to acquire. And then we've had this ED renovation project, which has been sitting out there for some time. But I also just want to remind the planning committee that we do have our facility master plan, and that facility master plan would indicate that our next capital expenditure for our infrastructure would be to improve through renovation or through construction activity, our operating. As it stands right now, we have got 3 operating rooms. Those operating rooms are old. The equipment that supports them is in need of replacement in some cases. There's certain types of procedural activities that can't take place in each one of those rooms because they don't necessarily meet 100 standards. And so I'm just planting a seed with the planning committee today that as we do make decisions about the emergency department renovation, we also need to be looking at what's that next step beyond that. Internally, the facilities director, Mark Walker, and I will be talking with senior leadership about what some of those next steps would look like in carrying out what the facility master plan envisioned. But I anticipate that, having talked with Ian and the senior leadership team, that the ORs are probably going to be that next direction we go. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
To the chair. This, what, $6 million that we have?
It's a little over 5.
Can that be used for the operating rooms? That's a real money source there, and needs to be upgraded, so can you just use it?
Through the chair, potentially, there are several reasons why it's good practice to set aside that type of funding for what I'm calling deferred maintenance activities. One of them has to do with unexpected expenditures that come up that are of an urgent need from a timing perspective. We recently decided that we were going to use some of that deferred maintenance funding, for example, to replace the boom lighting EV. That was not a part of the prioritized list of projects, but when we went out and tried to maintain it and were told by maintainers and vendors that we could no longer support the maintenance of those items, we had no choice other than to prioritize the replacement of those pieces of equipment. So I think the short answer is yes, in some fashion, but I would caution using all of that money for that purpose, because if something else were to come up that we didn't anticipate, a casualty of some, let's say, an electrical system. Several years ago, what resulted in that surge protection project was an unexpected surge that damaged equipment in the diagnostic imaging department. We need to have some capability to make our funds for those purposes. So definitely open to the conversation. Joe may understand on the financial side how we otherwise can move money around.
Yeah, the de-appropriation or appropriation funds is just a motion that can be made through, we're planning to start it, go to finance, gets board approval, goes to assembly. So I mean, moving appropriations from one fund to another fund is pretty straightforward process. But in the same token, if we run out of deferred maintenance and you guys had to replenish that in any given year, that's the same set of circumstances. I mean, moving funds in and out of these are pretty straightforward.
And to the chair, if you're not giving for the rights, you're not giving Nate the $3 million. Is that what I'm understanding? Because he's already got 5 million something.
Correct.
Okay, so what if you give him the $3 million and then he uses it for the operating? I mean, there's a need.
That's a good question. I like it. The budget has been submitted at this point
To the standard.
to the assembly. So if we want to start, if we wanted to appropriate $3 million, it would be out of the budget process. Which would just be, we'd have to start that process. If you guys want to go down the road of OR renovation.
Yeah.
I think that's a longer discussion.
Right through the chair. I'm a real fan of ORs, but they be very well cleaned up. So we can use some of our funds to fix things that just go bump in the night, but we're probably a good year and a half from the time we think through any of this. And the reason that is, it's somewhat programmatically determined. So for example, we have one OR that you can use for orthopedics. A good orthopedic program usually has 2 ORs. So a physician can do two surgeries roughly at the same time, and you get 4 in a day. So we have to go through and look at what programs you want to support what are the needs of those programs, what's currently in there. So I would say we're not quite ready to deploy dollars except when something breaks, like the lights that can't be fixed. So we're a good year easily for planning that. So it might be more appropriate from time.
Through the chair, I think the other things, as opposed to the ER, we could still continue to see patients. Once you start an OR project, you've got to have another OR already kind of set aside while you're remodeling other, you can do it simultaneously. You know, just leave it up. Air exchange.
Through the chair, but Mr. Cohen, that's exactly why I wanted to talk about it today. Is because we're not ready necessarily to expend funds toward that project, but we do have to start. I think you're absolutely right. We have to start planning it. It's a complicated process, and we have to do a lot of internal discussion, bring on the right consultants that can help us answer the questions that Mr. Gordon had mentioned, and figure out what our alternatives are that can keep us operating while construction may be taking place. So there's just a lot of pieces to it, but we need to start off.
Thank you.
And I would like to say, Nate and I have been talking about it, and Ian and I have been talking about it, but I want to get on this committee's radar screen that at some point, we need to have the conversation about integrating the facility master plan with our strategic goals. And right now, I don't even know when the last time it was, for my time, that the facility master plan was created. So it's been a while since this committee has looked at the facility master plan, and I'd like at some point, we're gonna have to take that on in light of what our strategic priorities are. Operating rooms are a case in point. They are really necessary to the long-term health. So, and it is next on the list, and it would align with our strategic goals. But there may be other things that we move up and some things that we push down or take off of the plan altogether. So we're not gonna, none of us are prepared to talk about it right now, but it will be on our radar screen a little bit later. So. All right. Any comments and questions? I want to, yeah, that's where I'm going. I want to give everyone a heads up. This morning, the initial meeting of the Information Services Executive Steering Committee took place, which is a group that was formed to really get a handle on some of the things that we've been talking about with technology and that hidden cost that technology brings and the duplications and some of the things that we need to be watching for. I'm gonna let Ian describe the process, but the heads up is that technology projects, information systems projects will go through the steering committee. They will come to us. We've had technology projects come to this committee in the past, but there's going to be a new pathway to get there. They'll come to us, they'll go to the finance committee and ultimately to the board, assuming their strategic technology initiatives. It's not, if we're talking about picking a copier system for the new copier system for the hospital, that's an operational thing, but the strategic initiatives will go up through the existing process, but they're going to be coming from the spot. So,
Sure, thank you. As you know, technology has been a big part of healthcare for many, many years. But how we connect those and with the electronic health record, it really has become a major force, a multiplier for clinicians if you do it right. If you do it wrong, you have a lot of costs and a lot of productivity lost. And I believe that information services can be a competitive advantage when you're trying to attract clinicians. If you recall my most recent letter, I said that we needed some disciplines embedded in our hospital operations that will last much longer than one here. One of those disciplines is our discipline, how we select, install, and look at IT systems. So we put together a governance committee, that's how it's called, where all IT systems have to come up through that group. And they have to present their suggestions of what we need, and it'll go up through different types of committees. So there'll be an infrastructure committee. We make sure that the practice and standards that are clinical in nature are embedded within their systems. It's a committee that will be very important. All of that will roll up into the governance committee, then to the SLT, right? Then we need a connection into the board because IT is such an integral part and it takes a lot of planning. We felt that the best way connected to the board is through the planning committee because it has resource requests. It also will have to go through the finance committee. Planning side of it really needs a connection so that we're all aligned. And those things that we want to do are additionally aligned with all of the strategies that the board has already previously approved. And so we're really pleased that that committee started today. It was something that part of established and implemented. We had at least 2 presentations today. And one was the PAC system, which is by far one of the most important subclinical systems, the Toro-Archival systems. And we are working through kind of one of the other things that was put into the board, which is our ERP system. But we hope to have this all organized and as a standard part of the work that the executive team does, is making sure clinical systems and other systems that support hospital reviewed, approved, and then moved out through for their review.
Any questions? This is foreshadowing. We're not gonna, nothing is gonna come to the finance group. Planning committee is today, so we won't see anything till next month, start to see anything till next month, but just to let you all know that to be watching for that as projects go up through the process, they'll come to us for review and approval. There'll be a couple that we've actually already talked about. The PAC system is and the RFP process for the
ERP.
for ERP.
RFP.
RFP for the yeah. Maybe I got the acronym. Those will be coming to this committee relatively soon. They're not quite ready, but.
Okay, add on, the board has asked us to connect the strategic goals to our activities, and we're actually working on that as we speak. The SLT will be next week, so we'll go through in detail how we want to do that. So that's another thing that we owe the board soon through the plan. Hopefully.
Any other comments, questions? All right. If there's nothing meeting next week, or next month. I think at this point, we probably should have one next month. Assuming that we're gonna have a couple of projects that will need some approval. So let's. Yeah,
That would be the,
right, May 3rd is fine with me. Well. Does that work for you, Ian? Nate?
How would May 3rd work for you for the next meeting?
I'm sorry, what is the date?
May 3rd, the first Friday in May?
Yes, I'm sure that'll work.
Not a town, but.
All right. All right, so. In our every other month, we've only skipped 1 month, but we may go back, but we'll see. Thank you all. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned and look how early. Yeah.